If you carry a ton of muscle and you're training in a way that's going to deplete that glycogen, it's almost like you're stimulating a fast. Not so much a fast, but you're pushing yourself more towards that fasting. And I think that's super interesting because there are people who want to add muscle, but at the same time they want to feel those benefits of autophagy, or ketones are being produced and they're feeling the effects of the ketones. And I tell them that if you're training in the morning, or even if in the evening, you need to understand you're going to burn through a bunch of that sugar. Then you're going to fast for 8 to 10 hours. You're probably getting very similar effects to someone who's not incorporating those carbs for the workout, but doesn't really work out hard and doesn't need to do that, you know?
Body, mind empowerment.
Get stronger, faster, smarter, quicker, friendlier, more helpful, more driven.
Everything the body needs.
Control your mind.
Welcome to the Body Mind Empowerment Podcast. I'm your host Siimland, and our guest today is Danny Vega. Danny is a ketogenic powerlifter, bodybuilder, coach, and a dad. He has a Master's of Science in Human Performance and has worked with many professional athletes. Danny, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be on.
Yeah, I'm great to have you on the show, and I feel like that we should have done this a lot sooner, but I'm glad that we could make it happen now.
And I know, and we need to make it happen on my podcast too. So as soon as we stop recording here, we'll get ours scheduled because we've been going back and forth for a while.
For sure, it sounds good. Maybe can you give us a brief background of how you got into doing keto and lifting weights?
Yeah, so I mean, lifting weights, that's been part of my life since I was 13. I was really fortunate to have an ex-Marine coach who was very by the book back in the day, and he helped me create a really strong foundation. As far as the lifting goes, you know, he had me doing compound lifts, squat, bench, deadlift, power clean. He didn't let me go up in weight until I had the form perfect. He didn't let me do single limb work. He didn't let me do bicep curls or anything like that. He even gave me a diet that I followed that, you know, at the time it wasn't low carb or anything. It was your traditional, you know, wake up in the morning, have eggs and oatmeal, have steak and potatoes and beef and potatoes and, you know, carbs and protein. And then I've always been into it. But obviously in college, I was eating your typical diet, playing college football. And then when I got my master's, I was still obviously very interested in nutrition. But at the time, you know, I kind of, if I were to say what I espoused, it was probably a low carb approach. I really, really liked, what are the people, the Canadians?
Eskimo, Inuit.
Oh, no, I'm thinking of an actual, Dr. John Berardi.
Okay.
So Dr. John Berardi, Precision Nutrition, that was the type of information that I followed back then. And I still think they're a great company and a great organization. But then, you know, after you graduate from college, you have all these obligations that you no longer have. Like you no longer have team lifts. You no longer have obligated to do anything. And so there were some years there that I was just having fun and I wasn't really trying to stay consistent. And it's ironic that when I got into CrossFit in 2011 was when I ignited my love for lifting again. And after 2 years of competing in CrossFit, I realized that I was probably better off doing something more suited to who I was, you know, my body type and everything. So I got into powerlifting, and I did that from about 2013 to 2016. And I was able to compete in several competitions, several meets. I hit the top 50 as well as the top 25 in my weight class.
Nice.
I also, you know, there were a few injuries here and there, nothing crazy. And then I tore my meniscus in 2015, and I was trying to nurse it back to health. I didn't want to get a surgery. And in 2016, I finally had to pull out of my last meet because it was just really, really bad. And I officially got the diagnosis and everything. And so I said to myself, you know what? I need to lose some weight. That's probably going to help me feel better. So I went on a diet. And at the time, like my friend created a diet for me. He was a bodybuilder, and it was your typical, you know, low fat diet. And over a period of 4 months, I lost a good 20 pounds or so. And I felt terrible. I got really lean, but then I would binge eat on the weekends. And finally, after 4 months of that, I realized that it wasn't serving me. So I had a friend who was doing graduate work here at University of Tampa with Dr. Wilson and Dr. Lowry. and he was always telling me about keto. And finally, in June of 2016, after those several months of losing weight and doing it with the traditional approach, I switched to keto, and I was no longer on a diet. I was just trying to improve my quality of life, and it was brilliant because my carbs were low, but my fat was low already. So when I just increased my fat from switching to a ketogenic diet, I just felt amazing. I felt like a loss of inflammation. I felt like my hunger was much better. I felt flat as well, and that didn't change for like 3 months, but that's kind of what got me into the ketogenic diet.
Yeah, it's so fascinating in the sense that there are a lot of similar people who are doing, let's say, power sports or strength sports, and they seem to like fit with the ketogenic template very easily because like it's somewhat easier to kind of lose the fat and still maintain their weight class and perform at their peak at time. So like people like Mark Bell have also used keto for cutting weight and such.
Yeah, and there's really good data that suggests that, you know, it may not be the data that I'm referencing is always a lot of the time that you'll see, like historically, the data that we've seen is that it's good at maintaining muscle. So at the very least, if you're in a caloric deficit and you're burning fat, you're losing weight, but it's able to maintain that muscle, which leads to a greater strength to weight ratio, which in a sport where you're competing in weight classes, that's just great. That's always good.
Yeah, and as a disclaimer for like everyone who is listening to an audio, then you should definitely check out Danny's Instagram because the guy is jacked and huge. So like I would imagine like no bodybuilder or a fitness guru can't imagine that you're able to like maintain that amount of muscle mass and even build it on a keto template. So what kind of reactions have you got from people?
Oh man, for the last several years, you know, like, you know, I think it's been really funny and interesting to watch because a lot of the time when they say, oh, you know, you can't build muscle on a ketogenic diet, I'm one of the people that they always suggest that, oh, yes, you can. And Robert Sykes is another one that people always talk about. And I really appreciate that. But I felt like up until recently, I didn't know how to respond to that because a lot of people say you can't build muscle on a ketogenic diet. And now I feel like it's part of my job to explain, yes, you can, and how you can do it. And so we've created a keto muscle intelligence program recently. I don't know if you've seen it, but that's been our biggest goal, is to really shed light on how to train correctly if you're following a ketogenic diet and you're trying to build muscle. So it's not so much focused on absolute strength, but it's focused on building muscle, you know, hypertrophy, and how to manage stress, how to manage your rest periods and your time under tension and all those things, so that you can put yourself in the right environment to build muscle on a ketogenic diet.
Yeah, it's so true that probably the most important factor is the stimulus and actually training in the right way, because you can definitely do the wrong type of training on any diet and not see any results, and you can definitely do the right type of diet, or like the right type of training on a suboptimal diet, or let's say something that is restrictive in some aspects, and still see huge gains. So the training is probably the most important part.
Yeah, and I don't see people talking about that too much, you know, and I know that a lot of people, you know, they kind of try to figure out the diet. They kind of, maybe they get a macro calculator or something. They're trying to figure things out on their own. And then they use a template that they either bought online or that they saw online. And a lot of these templates they're going to be your traditional standard lifting templates, where you're going to have minimal rest. You're going to have a lot of glycolytic activities. You're going to have high volume of lifting and high reps. And all of those things are okay if you have carbs in your system to fuel that type of training, that type of glycolytic training. But since we don't, that over time, in my opinion, would cause a massive increase in cortisol. You wouldn't be able to keep up with the energy demands from gluconeogenesis from just fat. So you would be risking lean tissue. And so what we talk about is, you know, when we created this, or when we structured this, is most of the time you're going to be training in a way that's consistent with the ketogenic diet. So you're going to be resting longer. You're going to be less time under tension. But then on a day where you do increase that volume, then maybe it does make sense, if you want to tap into that type of training, to consume some carbs pre-workout. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy, just enough to power you through that type of workout. And then, you know, post-workout, you have those carbs to modulate any, increases in cortisol. So that has been working very well, and I think we're getting a good response from it. But you're right, it's just so important, and it's very, very neglected.
Yeah, you mentioned that you're doing the ketogenic muscle intelligence program with Ben Bakolski. So can you talk like a little bit about like what are maybe some of the sneak peeks or some of the main principles of trying to build muscle with keto?
Yeah, so that's it all started last year, right before the summer. Right around May timeframe. Our friend Derek Lunsford had just moved from Indiana down to Tampa, and he had won the Mr. USA. He was a big prospect in the 212 weight class for the Olympia, and then he was training with us to get himself ready for Mr. Olympia last year. And Ben was in the middle of a strict ketogenic phase. And obviously I was always, I was carnivore. So what we started to notice was that we would have to rest longer, or we would hit a wall, and we would have to adjust our training, or we would hit a wall. And even back then, it was much easier for him to say, you know what, I feel kind of crappy. Let me have a banana pre-workout or something like that. And I was very much resistant to that. And so I didn't even tap into it fully last year when we did it. But it's interesting because during this whole process, as we're going through the training, we're having conversations and we're talking about, okay, what is optimal? What's not optimal? We need to put this all down and we need to create something. So we were done with this program like in August of last year. And it took almost a whole year to actually get the whole product out. But what people can expect is